The concourse at Atlanta International Airport buzzed with its usual energy. Intercoms barking boarding calls, the rhythmic drone of roller bags tracing their paths across the tile floor, hurried footsteps, and pockets of conversations in every direction. Overpriced coffee perfumed the chilled air, and somewhere distant, a baby's cries punctuated the controlled chaos. Right in the thick of it all stood a young girl at the Delta air check-in counter. She was small, but the set of her shoulders and the way she planted her feet suggested she was no stranger to standing her ground. Her name was Maya Brooks, 10 years old, wearing a plaid jacket zipped up to her chin, a weathered backpack slung across both shoulders. No stuffed animals peeking from the zippers, just hardback books that made the pack heavier than it needed to be. She didn't mind. She liked having something to read, and weight was a small price to pay for that. In one hand, she clutched her boarding pass. She was ready. She had done this before. Simple. Routine. Or so she thought. But the woman behind the counter, Karen Whitmore, mid-50s, perfectly ironed blouse, helmet of hairsprayed curls, wasn't interested in routine today. Karen's lips thinned as she glanced at Maya. Her gaze traveled up and down like Maya was a smudge on an otherwise clean window. She didn't reach for the ticket. Instead, she tilted her head, suspicion already dancing in her cold gray eyes. "Are you sure this is your flight?" Karen asked, her voice flat, polite on the surface but wrapped in doubt. Maya didn't blink. "Yes," she replied, holding out her ticket a little higher, like that would make Karen's question evaporate. Karen remained still, her eyes narrowing. "And where are your parents?" "I'm flying alone," Maya said evenly. "I'm registered as an unaccompanied minor. It's on the ticket." Karen gave a small, tight nod, but didn't touch the paper in Maya's hand. Instead, she leaned forward. "And they were fine with this?" she asked, the words slow and deliberate. The unspoken message clear. "I don't believe you." Maya had danced this dance before. Different airport, different agent, but the same song. It was never about the paperwork. Never about the flight. Always about her. "Miss," Maya said, carefully neutral, "I'm 10 years old. Not 3. I'm flying to see my father. My ticket is in order. Can you check me in, please?" There was no reason for Karen not to. But still, she hesitated, as if some part of her refused to believe this brown-skinned child belonged here. Karen finally picked up the ticket, examining it like it was counterfeit. Then she smiled. It wasn't kind. "I'm going to call a supervisor," she said. "Just to be sure." Maya exhaled through her nose. She knew what was coming. She always knew. If her skin had been lighter, if her hair had been straighter, none of this would be happening. 5 minutes turned into 10. Then the security guard showed up. Officer Brad Hewitt. Tall, broad, white. Everything about his presence suggested authority. His gaze swept over Maya in a split second and settled into an expression that told her everything. He'd already made up his mind. "They say you were wandering around alone," he said, his tone professional, controlled. "I wasn't wandering," Maya replied firmly. "I'm waiting to check in for my flight. I have a valid ticket. My parents paid for unaccompanied minor service." She spoke calmly. Factually, she had done this plenty of times. Officer Hewitt didn't look convinced. Karen folded her arms tighter, as though bracing for a storm. "The girl says her parents paid for it," Karen said, her voice edged with skepticism. "But look at her. She just seems lost." Maya resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "I'm not lost," she said. "Please check me in." Karen sighed dramatically and slid the boarding pass across the counter toward Officer Hewitt like it was evidence in a criminal case. The guard turned it over, scrutinizing the ticket as though it might confess to something. Finally, he shrugged. "It's valid." Maya said nothing, though the words sat on her tongue. "No kidding. But why are you alone?" Officer Hewitt pressed. "No one here to see you off?" Maya's patience was thinning. "That's the point of the service," she said. "I'm Fina." Karen leaned in, her smile sharp. "Oh, sweetie, you don't understand how the world works." Maya squared her shoulders. "Maybe you should call my father." Karen's expression hardened. "And who is your father?" Maya met her gaze evenly. "Senator Thomas Brooks." Silence. It stretched between them. Officer Hewitt's jaw ticked. Karen's eyebrows lifted, then arched high. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "A senator's daughter?" she repeated. "That's cute. And let me guess, you live in a fancy house in D.C." Maya rattled off her address. Street name. Zip code. Nochisitashin. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. Karen's smirk faltered. "Kids lie," Hewitt muttered. Maybe she picked a name that sounded important. "Exactly," Karen said quickly. "Come on. A little girl flying alone, no chaperone, and now she's claiming to be a senator's daughter? Doesn't add up." And then Karen leaned in even closer. Or maybe it's something worse. Maya's fist clenched. She knew what they were implying. "I demand you contact my father," Maya said, her voice cutting through their assumptions like a blade. Karen scoffed. "Sweetheart, let's be realistic." "I am," Maya replied. "You're 30 seconds away from ruining your life." Karen blinked. Officer Hewitt blinked. Maya calmly pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Karen asked. "Calling my father's attorney," Maya replied. The temperature in the room dropped. 30 minutes later, everything changed. The black SUV glided up to the curb outside. No ruse, no drama, just controlled power. Senator Thomas Brooks stepped out. His suit crisp, his face unreadable, but his eyes were cold. He walked straight to Maya, taking in the tension in her small frame. Then he looked at Karen. Then Officer Hewitt. "You," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. "What gives you the right to detain my daughter?" Silence. Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Senator Brooks stepped closer. "You detained a child," he continued. "Refused to let her board a flight she had every right to be on. You accused her of being abandoned. Or worse." Karen began. "She followed every rule," he cut in, "and you still treated her like she didn't belong." Karen's face was pale. She tried again. "We were just following protocol." "No," Senator Brooks said, his tone cutting. "You made a choice." And then he turned his gaze on Officer Hewitt. "You let this happen." Hewitt swallowed hard. "My daughter has more composure at 10 than you do in your entire career," Brooks said flatly. Karen's hands trembled. It was a misunderstanding. Brooks tilted his head. "No, it was discrimination." The word hung heavy in the air. And then came the media storm. Videos surfaced. Headlines screamed. Senator's daughter detained at Atlanta airport. Racial discrimination alleged. Karen's face was everywhere. Her eye rolls. Her smirks. Her dismissive tone. Social media exploded. Hashtag Justice for Maya trended worldwide. The airline scrambled, issuing hollow apologies. Their stock plummeted within hours. Karen was summoned to the back office. Her manager didn't bother with pleasantries. "Hand in your badge." It was over. The internet doesn't wait. It doesn't forgive. Karen's name was dragged across every platform. Old complaints resurfaced. Her history dissected. She was done. And Maya? Maya stood beside her father, calm and composed. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. He squeezed her hand. "You deserve respect. Always." And the world listened.